Okay, so let's get started. We might have a few more attendees joining us. So it gives me great pleasure to be chairing this second panel of the first annual GNET conference. Today's panel is focused on ideologically motivated violent extremists and conspiracy. So I'm very excited looking forward to today's presentations and the Q&A. So today we have three speakers. The first speaker is Munira Mustaffa. Munira is a fellow at Verve Research. She has been working in the security industry and the private government and military sectors since 2014. She has assisted on the Against Violent Extremism, or AVE, project at the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, and served as a subject matter expert for the Stabilization Network. She has worked professionally as a counterterrorism analyst at both government and military levels. Munira earned her MSc in Countering Organized Crime and Terrorism from University College London. Her interests include counterterrorism, intelligence, and disinformation and propaganda in the cyberspace. So we're really looking forward to your presentation. The second speaker that we have for today is Nazneen Mohsina. Nazneen is a senior analyst at the Center of Excellence for National Security of the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies at Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. She holds a Master's of Science in International Relations from the School of International Studies and a bachelor's degree in Mass Communication from Murdoch University. Her research interests include contemporary debates about identity and identity politics and how it affects inter-ethnic or inter-religious relations and how domestic and international politics shape and bring one's religious ethnic identity to the fore. I see someone's raised their hand. I'll get to that in a second. And then we see the third presenter for today is Dr. William Alcorn. William is an associate director at the Center for Analysis of the Radical Right, or CAR. He is a specialist on anti-Islamic protest movements and radical right social movements in the UK and Western Europe. His PhD thesis mapped political, policing, and local authority responses to the English Defence League in 5 UK locations. William has recently finished his first academic monograph with Routledge, looking at policy responses to the EDL in Britain first over the past decade. His previous published work has looked at the dynamics of activism within anti-Islam movements and counter-extremism responses towards such groups. William has taught undergraduate courses and given lectures on the radical right in Western Europe, both at the social movement and party political level. Previous consultancy has included delivering counter-narrative engagement sessions in the northeast of England and putting together a Countering Radical Right Narratives educational pack. Okay, see that person's now lowered their hand. So each presenter will have 7 minutes to give their presentation, and thereafter we'll have a Q&A. So if you do have a question for our presenters, please type it in the Q&A function, and then I will gather the questions and moderate the discussion. So starting us off today is Munira, so you have the floor.
Hi everyone, thank you for having me here today. So I'll be talking about right-wing extremism and phenomenon in Southeast Asia and why it's important to understand it. So at the moment, when we talk about violent extremism in Southeast Asia, I think there's a general association with the Islamist movement, like the militant Islamism and groups such as Al-Qaeda, Jama'ah Islamiyah, Abu Sayyaf Group, Jama'ah Ansar Dawlah. So and we seem to forget that there's a history even prior to the Islamist movement, that there has been militant left-wing terrorism and communism and insurgency. So when we were confronted, for instance, in the case of Singapore, when there was the case of a 16-year-old boy who was detained because he was planning an attack on a mosque to mirror the attack in Christchurch. I think that created a ripple of shockwave across the security community in Southeast Asia because and it brought on a lot of questions because he was inspired by the right-wing extremism that's a lot like what we're seeing in the West, like the white supremacy. And that brought on a lot of questions, such as, is right-wing extremism rising in Southeast Asia? How did it happen? Or what brought it on? Things like that, whether it's reciprocal. So what I'm doing right now, my current research is looking at it, I'm still at the exploratory phase of it, to understand the nature of right-wing extremism phenomenon in Southeast Asia. And even though I say that rather broadly, I think a lot of the what I'm looking through mostly the lens of Malaysia and also Singapore, probably a bit of Singapore, because we have a kind of linked history and experience there. So the thing is, what to understand about right-wing extremism in our part of the world is that at the moment, a lot of people think that it is a reciprocal feedback because of the ongoing onslaught of jihadi militant movements, Islamist movements, and this is the counter reaction by non-Muslims in retaliation. And it is seen as an Islamophobic response. And I think that based from my own current ongoing research is that this is an historical oversimplification, because for instance, it seems that a lot of people overlook the fact that there has been some neo-Nazi history in Southeast Asia as well. There is a neo-Nazi movement that went back as far back as in the 90s. For instance, in Malaysia's heavy metal punk music scene in the form of Malay power music since the 1990s. And this is rather similar to the US, UK music scenes in the late 1980s and 1990s, where these National Socialist bands would clash with the Malay anti-fascist skinhead community. There's a lot of not exact copycat, but a lot of similarities there. And meanwhile, in Myanmar, for instance, there was a Buddhist neo-Nazi group formed as early as 2013 as part of an anti-Rohingya and anti-Muslim movement. And they have been known to resort to Nazi tactics while glorifying the violent British far-right movement like the English Defence League. And I think the leader of the group even mentioned that he was rather enamored and inspired them. So the thing is that what to understand about these movements is that a lot of them have a lot of common with the ethno-religious goals to preserve the purity of respective nations. And this is rather separate from the presence of other religion or ethnicities. This still requires a lot of research and understanding how it is, because I think it's it can be quite how to say overwhelming because to understand how deep or widespread the ideology is in Southeast Asia, in Malaysia and Singapore. But what's clear, for instance, like the Singaporean case, is that the boy was a staunch Christian whose decision was to copy the Christchurch attack, and it was strongly motivated by his antipathy towards Islam. But I think it's rather an oversimplification of seeing it as a religious clash of ideology. But I think it's important to see it as an appropriation of ideology, that the thoughts, the neo-Nazi thoughts, supremacist politics has been adopted by. And this is where it can get a bit muddling for a lot of observers, is that why are these Asian youths are adopting this ideology when they are not white or Aryan themselves? And this can be very, very mystifying. And this is where I think that it's important to look at two aspects, which is it's important to understand the history of countries and experiences, the experiences of countries that were once colonized by and impacted by European powers. And the second is to understand how power is related to the proximity of whiteness in post-colonial states. And the other thing that we need to understand is that to unpack how chauvinistic impulse arise as a response to cultural pessimism. And there is a deep traditionalist thoughts and deep inclination to reject what's modern and embrace what's considered as pure and traditional. And there's a lot of envisioning and whitewashing of past history. For instance, like in Malaysia, there is now a movement trying to whitewash the history of Malaysia and push the idea that it was always Islamic, as opposed to the fact that it was actually established by a Hindu kingdom once long time ago. And this feeds into the whole rhetorics, racist rhetorics. And this is where a lot of those who uphold this kind of vision tend to reject equality, and they tend to be very xenophobic, and they uphold supreme masculine values, and they want to, and these are the most immediate recognizable features of far-right and right-wing populist ideologies. So I think one example that cropped up in my mind was a case of Elliot Rogers of the Alta Vista attack, and the fact that he was Malaysian, he had Malaysian roots, also brought up a lot of questions into the whole relation of this supremacist ideology in our relation to our Asianness as well. And there is and there have been reports and studies talking about how he suffered from deep-seated social anxieties concerning his identity, his complex racial identity, and idealized masculinity, and while harboring intense misogyny. And he was forever fixated and obsessed with the concept of racial hierarchy and a rejection of his Asian identity and internalization of white supremacy. And a lot of his conversation, a lot of these movements that support this whole concept, this whole ideas, are taking place on the internet, and and social media platforms such as Facebook, Reddit, 4chan, Twitter, and turn out to be a very important platform for all these people to congregate and share ideas and validate each other's worldview and exchange ideas. And it has become their echo chamber. And this is where they freely sow their messages and disseminate relentless misinformation, conspiracy theories, and whitewash history and theories, conspiracy theories in terms of memes and trolling posts and tweets. So I'm so sorry. I'm still looking into this, but suffice to say that sorry, people, I'm very, very nervous. I have to say this. So the thing about what we need to understand is that what's the other aspect to understand about this movement is that a lot of the language and concept and ideas were borrowed and appropriated from the Western far-right extremist movements, and they borrowed a lot of the anti-woke language, and they adopted it into their own lexicon as well, to shape their own narratives and sending messages encouraging the right to commit violence against those who don't agree or meet their values. So, and the key takeaway from what I can say is that the key takeaway from this so far is that I think the meaning of cyberspace urgently needs to re-examine and redefine, to contextualize all these actions and consequences, and understanding how these cultures on subcultures, online subcultures, can be translated into violent grassroots movement, and how they thrive. That's all from me for today.
Thank you so much, Munira, for your thoughts and insights. And in many ways, you touched upon so many themes and topics of discussion that I think we'll see throughout today's webinar. But in particular, someone myself who works on far-right extremism in the Global South and the legacy of colonialism in shaping far-right movements, there's certainly a lot of overlap there. But I sort of leave it now to Nazneen to give her presentation. And as someone who also works on Hindutva in India, I'm really excited to hear about your findings. So I will leave it to you. Just give me 1 second here. I do see that there is a participant who's had their hand raised since the very beginning of the discussion. So maybe I will get to you, Suzanne, once the presenters are done and once we move on to the Q&A, if that's okay. So Nazneen, why don't you go ahead?
All right, thank you. Let me share my screen. Hello, everyone. My name is Nazneen, and I'm going to be speaking about Hindu vigilantism online and how that often translates into offline harms in India. Right. So before I get into how the internet is used for the Hindutva movement, let me explain what Hindutva is. Right. It's a right-wing ethno-religious nationalist ideology that aims to recast India, the Indian identity and culture purely in terms of Hindu values. Of course, Hinduism is not monogamous, but yeah. In other words, it wants to shift India from being a secular nation to a majoritarian nation where Hindus are privileged. As such, it goes beyond the ballot box and aims to bring about a Hindu renaissance to fully transform the Indian society. Contemporary Hindutva Contemporary Hindutva has been present since pre-independence in India. The parent organization of the current movement, the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, in short, the RSS, was formed in 1925. It's part of the wider Sangh Parivar, which is the family of Hindu nationalist organizations to which the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party, the BJP, is affiliated to. The Sangh Parivar also has other divisions like the social service wing, religious, militant, and even an international wing which serves the diaspora. The BJP is its political wing. The Hindutva movement was a fringe in Indian politics when it started out, but over the last century, they have built a strong grassroots support base. Since the BJP took power in 2014, the party and its affiliated groups have tried to consolidate their influence through local violent Hindutva organizations, pressure on the media, and dominance in national politics. Ethnic and religious tensions have intensified both offline and online. There have been systemic targeted attacks on the minority communities such as the Muslims, the Dalits, Christians, and the secularists. The Indian constitution is being rewritten in accordance with the Hindu nationalist agenda. This includes enacting the Citizenship Amendment Act, the abrogating of Article 370, which curtails the semi-autonomous status of India's only Muslim majority state, Jammu and Kashmir. Most recently, the Hindu nationalists are trying to introduce laws against interreligious marriages, which they term love jihad. I will get into it a bit later. Right. So how does the internet come into play? The internet, especially social media platforms, have been a notable tool for the Hindutva movement. The use of the internet by Hindutva members to spread propaganda is not new. However, the disinformation, fake news, hate speech online are now increasingly being translated into offline harms. The BJP maintains an IT cell, a network of influencers and trolls to dominate social media platforms. It's important significant organized presence on the internet. They're just one part of the whole Hindutva ecosystem. Alongside its grassroots competencies, the online environment serves three roles, which is the demonization of the other, the out group, that is, spreading rumors, calling to arms and trolling and silencing critics. They also distort the public sphere. State-sponsored IT cells, members, and supporters of the BJP openly fan ethno-religious tensions and incite and participate in violence without any fear of police retribution. There is an environment of impunity whereby offenders roam free and are sometimes even given political power. Right. So a sizable troll army works to try and control the narrative on social media platforms. They threaten and harass journalists, for instance, and academics critical of the BJP-led government. They also spread disinformation and then divert attention from governance issues. Dissenters are harassed, intimidated, shamed, and forced into silence. Recently, like a few months back, even international celebrities were trolled, like Rihanna and climate activist Greta Thunberg became the target of vicious troll campaign in India after they brought international attention to the farmers' protests that was going on there. Social media is used to also foment hatred and suspicion against minority groups and dissenting voices. While Muslims and other minorities are deemed as the outgroup and dangerous for the country and society, they are often deemed anti-national to India. The liberals and pluralists and other dissenting voices are demonized for supposedly refusing to address how the outgroup is outgroup and and appeasing these supposed outgroup, right? With identity-based populism dominating the Indian political landscape, minority groups are easily vilified through the use of conspiracy theories and hate speech, especially so because media literacy remains very low in most parts of the country. Hindu nationalists also use social media to asperse Muslims in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, which amplified Islamophobia in India, which is the offline harm that I'm talking about. So offensive hashtags spreading hatred and seeking to portray Muslims as carriers of the coronavirus trended on Twitter. Social media was also rife with fake news and conspiracy theories accusing Muslims of deliberately conducting a campaign to spread COVID-19 to the Hindu majority. So this resulted in demonization, denial of medical care, boycotts of Muslim businesses, and even attacks on the frontline workers of the Muslims in the country. So this is not just for like against Muslims. Even supporters of the farmers' protests that were going on in India a couple of months back were labeled Khalistanis, which is connoting affiliation to a Sikh separatist movement that came about around 1978, because the farmers' protests were largely painted as people protesting from the Punjab states, which were mainly Sikhs. So social media is also frequently used to spread rumors. For instance, many cow vigilante lynchings of Muslims and Dalits happen after rumors of cow slaughter or smuggling spread on social media. Often videos and beatings are shared on social media platforms. The kind of performance terrorism that help, like this kind of performance terrorism help perpetrators to gain legitimacy among other violent Hindutva groups, brand themselves and attract more people to the cause and normalize the violence against minorities. People are also beaten up, jailed, and even killed following rumors of love jihad, which is a Hindutva conspiracy theory that claims that Muslim men are luring gullible Hindu women into marriage and converting them to Islam. In 2017, someone called Mohammed Afrazul, a migrant worker, was hacked, a Bengali migrant worker, like who was working in another state, was hacked to death, and his body was burned at the scene by a man who had videotaped the entire burnings and killing him, and uploaded it on YouTube, along with a sermon against what he called entrapment of Hindu girls by Muslim men, which is essentially what they term love jihad. Fake news is also used to communalize events. For instance, during the post-election violence that happened in West Bengal, a state in India recently, BJP leaders and activists communalized the political violence by blaming it on Muslims and infiltrators. They shared misleading posts, unverifiable pictures, and inflammatory rumors with a communal slant to it. In a post by the National General Secretary of the BJP, Kailash Vijayvargiya, he shared a video with the caption TMC, which is the Trinamool Congress in West Bengal, the opposition to BJP, who is also in power in TMC is in power in West Bengal. So TMC Muslim gunds are attacking women BJP workers. It was then also shared by many other BJP leaders. The other groups who are the subgroups of the Sangh Parivar are also affiliated with the BJP in So social media has also been used by adherents of Hindutva to call to arms. Numerous accounts peddling hate-filled nationalist quotes are called for violence against minorities have flourished despite being flagged and reported by many users. Most recently, it was used to call for organized retaliation by Hindutva militias after post-election violence in West Bengal that I mentioned earlier. So social media was also linked to the anti-Muslim riots that happened in Delhi in 2020, which was one of the worst communal violence India has seen in decades. Eventually, the Peace and Harmony community of Delhi Assembly found Facebook guilty for its role in the riots, for aiding and abating hate speech, incitements to violence by members of BJP and its affiliates. Radical Hindutva activists claiming to be warriors and saviors of Hinduism ran coordinated campaigns through posts and live videos and appealed for religious war. Charge sheets filed by the police also revealed how rioters in a WhatsApp group called Qatar Hindutva Ekta, which loosely translates to Radical Hindu Unity, planned attacks, discussed battle tactics and logistics, which were to assemble, calls for assistance, sources for weapons and immunizations, etc. Members of the group eventually vandalized local mosques and properties belonging to Muslims and forced Muslims to shout Jai Shri Ram, which translates to Hail Lord Ram, which is a god of the Hindus, before killing 9 Muslims. The groups frequently made references to leaders and affiliates of the BJP. The most prominent name that surfaced was of Kapil Mishra, who is also one of the leaders of BJP, who had given ultimatum to the police through his Twitter account to clear the protesters against who are protesting against the Citizenship Amendment Act, failing which he had threatened to gather his supporters and clear the roads himself through violence. Violence had begun on the very night of Mishra's tweets, and not only were Hindutva radicals able to evade charges eventually, Amnesty has also alleged that police were complicit in emboldening this Hindutva violence. Right, majoritarian violence fueled by the spread of right-wing populism in the digital age has posed a complex challenge to India's social fabric, which has historically premised on the nation's intrinsic culture of coexistence and interfaith harmony. So like I mentioned earlier, low media literacy and cultural biases have worsened this this misinformation, the spread of misinformation offline. Already, pluralism in India is showing signs of irreversible erosion. Not only does the Modi government remain apathetic, government officials themselves engage in the proliferation of hate speech and misinformation online, often exalting those inciting ethno-religious violence. Some of the ministers and even PM Modi himself endorses the virtual mob by following them on social media outlets like Twitter. All this has created a climate of impunity for Hindutva extremists. Even though intellectuals and numerous grassroots initiatives are calling for tolerance, there is little evidence that that this intolerance or hate will soon subside or be met with a robust or effective counter narrative. Perhaps it is because of this reason, it has become even more important for social media companies to ensure that their platforms are not weaponized against individuals or groups, even when violators of policies are sanctioned by the very state. Right, that is all I have for now. Thank you. Let me stop share. Okay.
Great, thank you so much, Nazneen. And that was such a good overview of contemporary Hindutva in India, and particularly the role of social media in fueling political violence. So I'm sure we'll have a great discussion. And then finally, our third speaker for today is William Alcorn. So Will, would you like to share your screen?
Great, yeah, thanks Eviane, and thanks to Nazneen and Munira for some really insightful presentations, especially this kind of growing threat picture that we're seeing in terms of the far-right and right-wing populism and its connections to violence in the global south. Let me just quickly play this so it's full screen. So yeah, today I'm going to have a bit more of a focus looking in particular at conspiratorial narratives and their links to violent radicalization amongst right-wing lone actors. And I'll be mainly focusing on several terror attacks and right-wing lone actor manifestos connected to those attacks in 2019, where we saw this kind of start of a wave of what some people have referred to as a kind of stochastic form of right-wing terrorism, where one actor inspires others with similar kind of modes of attack and repertoires of action. So this is a bit of analysis that I've done fairly recently, so it's a fairly exploratory piece of work, but hopefully it will unearth a bit more in terms of this whole nature of conspiracy theories and the motivations of some of these actors. So just quickly, we can kind of see conspiratorial narratives and conspiracy theories being talked a lot about recently, especially in relation to right-wing lone actors, going back to 2011 with Anders Breivik and his attack in Oslo, connections there with things like this kind of invasion Eurasia conspiracy theory in particular. And I mean, to some extent, we can suggest that all narratives and propaganda by extremist groups are conspiratorial to some extent, but something that's been of interest to me more recently in my own research has been looking at the qualitative difference between violence and non-violence and where the tip over points occur. So I think it's interesting to ask what is peculiar about far-right conspiratorial narratives and their ability to inspire violence. Obviously, the most recent manifestation of this is the idea of this great replacement, demographic replacement by non-white minorities to the white majority, and some of the threat narratives that have emerged amongst right-wing extremist groups around that. And also, is it conspiratorial narratives alone that play a pivotal role? Are they kind of background or individual level factors? I won't be able to really address those. I'll be mainly looking at the narratives themselves and the structure in this talk. But I think that's also an interesting point of reflection and investigation. So I'll mainly be focusing on three right-wing lone actors, Brendan Tarrant, John Earnest, and Patrick Kucius. So in terms of just methodology and background, I'm mainly using theories in this paper about significance quest theory. And this is suggesting basically that people engage in violent extremism mainly because of a need for personal significance. So the desire to matter, to be someone, to be on this kind of heroic kind of quest is the dominant need, along with other enabling factors that underlies violent extremism, like having online networks, and also the narratives themselves, the eliminationist narratives that get thrown alongside that. I'm also drawing upon Bayali's 2019 paper, Stephen Byerly, he goes into quite a lot of depth comparing different kind of archetypes of violent conspiratorial narratives, dividing. So he looks at ISIS, Nazi Germany, as well as a few others, and he kind of distinguishes not just between out groups and in groups in the narratives, but also kind of traitors that are targeted. This idea of a contaminated part of the in group that is also held responsible by violent actors, and I'll talk a bit about his paper in a minute. So it's kind of a mixed method research comparing content analysis across all three of the manifestos produced by Tarrant, Ernest and Kucius, along with taking some basic counts that have already been done by Ihsan and Stott in a 2020 report that they did on these manifestos. So yeah, those are some research questions I've already highlighted, including those other factors which I think needs further exploration, but possibly elsewhere. So just quickly about literature review in the paper. So while there's a lot of academic consensus about extremist groups and extremist words by these groups, sharply delineating between in-groups and out-group identities, much remains to be done to actually fully characterize this type of language, and hence to better understand and evaluate its exact role in violent action. There has been a few kind of more recent attempts to kind of put some empirical flesh upon kind of this call to action. So Byerly, he suggests that suspected complex and multi-layered linguistic aggression against an in-group by multiple enemies within a conspiratorial narrative or framework, he suggests can provide legitimized violence against a close, sorry, that's meant to say out-group. So he uses the idea of, he draws on Nazi Germany and how kind of German Jews and the Allied states also figure within a broader kind of conspiratorial violent narrative and framework. The next study is Gregory Rusi and Dan Richard and Dongran Wang, and they find that loss of in-group significance, again what I kind of alluded to earlier, in violent tracks is quite important. And when they compared between right-wing extremists and Islamist extremists, they found that neo-Nazis were significantly more likely to promote loss of significance within their violent tracks and narratives. So this kind of, there's a qualitative difference there going on, which is important to bear in mind. Then also more recently, Holger Marx and Janina Powers, they talked about where, they looked at some online campaigns by far-right groups, and they suggested that narratives of imperilment, when they converge with a greater story of national threat, then violence becomes a logical option. So this kind of element of threat kind of framing in narratives is quite important in their findings. Then finally, in kind of again going back to and zooming out into some of the background individual factors, as opposed to just the words themselves that some of these lone actors have been putting out and presenting in these manifestos. Rottweiler and Gill's 2020 paper looking at kind of tendencies towards violence. They find that individuals exhibiting low self-control, holding weaker law-relevant morality and scoring higher in self-efficacy tend to have high levels of violent extremist intentions. I think they did some surveys about violent intention in Germany. So these are kind of restricted to findings there. I shall move on because I feel that I'm going to slowly run out of time. So, okay, the first case, well-known Christchurch shooter. This happened in March 2015, over 50 people killed over attack against 2 mosques. And it's become this, the title of the manifesto, The Great Replacement, has become a kind of common far-right conspiratorial theme around this idea of intentional demographic replacement. In particular, the manifesto focuses on fertility rates, again, looking at kind of these more kind of biological markers and hierarchies that Munira talked about in her presentation. And besides some other words, this is a word cloud from the Eason and Stott paper. Replacement is talked about many times, 4 to 6 times in comparison to immigration, which only gets featured on 33 occasions. Next, looking at John Ernest. So he performed a whole spree of attacks. In particular, the April 2019 shooting at the Poway synagogue in Poway. This is a slightly shorter manifesto. It's only perhaps, I think, about a third of the Great Replacement. And while there's kind of considerable overlap, Ernest is explicitly anti-Semitic, as you can see in that word cloud, Jews and race. This kind of less kind of cultural form of racism is kind of prominent. And this we can see from this quote. This crisis narrative is kind of fairly telling at the core of his manifesto, where he talks about every Jew is responsible for the meticulously planned genocide of the European race. So whereas it might be Islam or Muslims in other cases, particularly Jewish population is singled out. And that's obviously telling in terms of attack planning and the target of the attack itself being a synagogue. Now looking at the shortest of the 3, this is Patrick Kucius's Inconvenient Truth. Interesting parallels there with Al Gore's call to action around climate change. And there's some environmental themes in this manifesto. This is the shortest of the 3. It's only 2,356 words. And while it has a fairly strikingly similar tone in terms of invaders is quite a key cross-cutting theme across all of the manifestos. Kucius couches this in terms of Hispanic population, Hispanic migration into the US specifically, and dresses it up in this language of protection and self-defense against genocide. And this idea of white genocide has obviously become a key kind of global frame for a lot of extreme far-right groups more generally. So though the out-group is different, his sense of in-group loss is also similarly palpable in the reading of his manifesto as well as the others, blaming more specifically immigration, but also corporate America. There's a kind of whole theme of anti-corporatism in his manifesto as well as others. So this is the analysis that I just wanted to quickly get to. I think what's interesting here is, again, as we noted, there's this difference of the outgroup that they target. So it's ideologically and different across all of them. I think what's interesting though is the commonality around the hybrid in-group of traitors and contaminated in-group between all of these 3 attackers. So a lot of talking about the fault of corporations, kind of celebrity culture. I think Tarrant talks about Madonna as being a whore, for example. I mean, yeah, this kind of targeting kind of corporate America. And it's interesting that yeah, Pastor's shooter targeted a Walmart, this kind of big kind of global brands, as well as obviously the Hispanic community more specifically. And then what's common across all of these is this talk about kind of like a white, global kind of white ethno-religious group of people. And specifically Ernest Manifesto, he talks about kind of reifying European Christian stock. So to conclude, the role of conspiratorial narratives is something that I think is a bit underexplored and underutilized. More specifically, what kind of I found within this analysis are that there's kind of these broad structures of conspiracy theories that yeah, are good to keep in mind, and this kind of a sense of in-group loss that's palpable in all three of the manifestos. I think further research needs to be done in terms of the individual psychological characteristics, as well as the context-specific risk factors that connect with violent intentions. And there's also this endpoint, which might be interesting for the discussion in a moment. There's people like the Hanau shooter, who's been labelled as far right, but who is engrossed in multiple and different conspiracy theories that weren't connected to far right extremism. So is there something very specific about conspiracy theories more generally that invade people towards violence? So that's it for my presentation, and I shall give back the floor to Eviane.
Great, thanks very much, Will. So we've already have some questions here that were submitted in the Q&A. So I'm going to combine a couple of questions and then present them to our speakers so that we can have time to address as many of them as we can. So the first questions I have here are for Munira. So really two different questions. So one focused on Malaysia. So Catherine Andrews asks, is there much anti-Semitism in the Malaysian far-right discourse, or is it predominantly anti-Islam? And then another question pertaining to Singapore, which was, is the case of the 16-year-old Indian Christian teenager an outlier within Singapore? Is there evidence of other right-wing extremist groups in Singapore? And similarly, does Christianity play into far-right dynamics within Singapore and within Southeast Asia more broadly?
All right, so I'll answer the first question, which was for Catherine Andrews. If there is much anti-Semitism in Malaysian far-right dialogue, or is it predominantly anti-Islamic? I'm afraid the answer is a yes. There is a strong rejection of the Jewish existence amongst the far-right in Malaysia. And at the same time, it's also rather complex, and this has to do with a lot of it to do with the mobilization, popularization of the neo-Nazi movement in Malaysia that seems to be regaining popularity once again. It was once a movement back in the 90s, but now because of the movements in the West, and there's been, as I mentioned earlier, there's an appropriation of ideas that the movement has been revived back in Malaysia into a more palatable form, if you say. And there's a lot of conversation promoting Hitler's ideology, Mein Kampf, and things like that. And I think a lot of it is fueled by this is fueled by the global politics as well, and the concept of the Jewish conspiracy, where there is the idea that everything is being ruled and manipulated by Jewish people in the world, including finances, economics, and it's difficult to trace back the origins of these ideas and conspiracy, and I think this has a lot to do with the political relationship aspects as well. But I can't really quite comment on that. It's not really my domain. Yeah. I'm hoping I answered that question. It's actually the opposite for Singapore, but I can't really comment much on Singapore because I don't really have the full data, and I think that actually would lead towards Mark's question, which is about the far right actors being arrested in Singapore, and if Christian beliefs play into the far right dynamics in Southeast Asia. So it seems, to answer that question well, I think it's important to understand the racial dynamics of each country in Malaysia and Singapore. And although we have shared history, the social makeup of it is not exactly the same. The social relationship is not the same. And it's also important to recognize that Christianity in Southeast Asia is not a monolith. There's a lot of different versions of Christianity being practiced, including Catholicism, Protestant movements, Seventh-day Adventists. And interestingly enough, I just learned recently that not all churches in Malaysia, for instance, have the same belief in their anti-Semitism responses. So whether or not this is sorry, I need to see the question again. Whether if this instance, if this is an outlier, I would say that I don't think it's going to be a huge movement like the like terrorist groups like Abu Sayyaf or Jemaah Islamiyah. I think that the right-wing movements in Singapore, for instance, is still rather decentralized. I don't think there's an actual solid organization as far as I know, but this is just from a superficial observation from me. It would be the same for Malaysia as well, although there has been a couple of right-wing groups in Malaysia as well. And this also what complicated things the most is that it also brings about the question if we should start seeing the Islamist ideology as a separate ideology, or as part of a far-right feature as well. Quite similar to the context of America as well, where Christianity is a strong part of the far-right movement.
Great, thanks very much. Super interesting. So then we have two questions here for Nazneen. And in the meantime, if anyone does have a question for Will, please do type that into the Q&A. So for Nazneen, the first question is, are Hindutva conspiracy theories unique to India's social and political context, or shared with English language conspiracy culture? So for example, anti-5G towers, and the Bill Gates genocide theories, etc. And then the second question is related more in terms of the role that individuals can play in de-radicalization. So one participant who comes from India and comes from a hardcore supporter of the BJP government, essentially they're asking, what role could individuals play in terms of helping to de-radicalize perhaps family members or friends who do support Hindutva?
Right. Thank you for your questions. To answer the first one, if it shares any conspiracy culture with the English language, I think Indians in general are so advanced to think about anti-5G or Bill Gates genocide theories. Mostly, or at least my area of research is on this socio-political context, which is which has a lot to do with Islamophobia, anti-minority groups, about majoritarianism. So those things, yes, they do not necessarily with English language conspiracy culture, but they do share a lot of similarity with in terms of the whole Islamophobic narratives in other parts of the world, such as Myanmar. Even Myanmar has, the concept I mentioned about love jihad. Myanmar has a similar concept. When you talk about how Muslims are taking over the Hindus, the majorities in India, and are not good for the country, it's very similar to the West and a lot of other countries where Islamophobia exists, right? So in that sense, yes, it's similar, but I don't think the anti-5G or Bill Gates genocide theories has come into play in the Indian context. In terms of de-radicalization, you see, it's hard in India because the Hindutva movement itself, it's state sponsored, right? So if the state participates in the very movement that you want to eliminate, it gets very difficult to do it. But I think there have been a lot of grassroots initiatives, regardless of the kind of hatred or trolling that a lot of secularists or pluralists are facing in India. They are still I guess trying to bring it back to status quo, which is the plural, pro-tolerance, pro various religious groups, plural India, right? But I guess I think, see, this is what I'm from Singapore, so this is what Singapore practices, which is a lot of interactions between the different communities. For example, there should be communication between like if there is interaction, I feel like there is less hatred, and it's also supported by a lot of academic theories, right? So maybe there should be increase in interactions between the different communities, be it religious leaders, be it like anything, even in schools, universities, interact with the different diverse communities. So the other thing might be, like I mentioned, policies since we are talking about social media, as in my presentation was about social media and how that foments hatred and translates to offline harm, right? So maybe social media companies can help to implement their policies, which is already official in their company itself, right? But that's often not the case because there are concerns of backlash from local hate groups, and then there are fears of damaging companies' business prospects in India. So because India is, especially given that India's social media user base is highest in the world. I mean, recently Facebook was like Wall Street Journal published a report about Facebook and how one of their policy officials refused to crack down on hate speech by BJP politicians. So I guess it's tough given the scenario, but I guess it's slow. But you see, India has a very rich history of pluralism, of it's known for how democracy has existed in India, regardless of so many differences. So I guess it will eventually go back. We just got to wait it out. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it's very difficult to answer a question like that, right? No one has the right to one-all solution. So I don't see any more questions here, and I know that we're short on time. We're running out of time at least. I guess I just had a comment for Will, which was, listening to your presentation, and you mentioned Breivik earlier in the presentation, and it made me think about the fact that Breivik was very inspired by Hindutva activists in India. And he talked about how the Western far right needs to model itself after Hindutva activists, and this is pre-Modi times too, right? So it's going to be quite interesting to see what his reaction would be today. But perhaps for your paper to think more deeply about the types of transnationalization of these conspiracies, right? And to think about this in a much broader scope. So I don't know if you had, this is just a comment more than a question, but something for you to think about when it comes to developing your paper further.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting reading the manifesto specifically. I think it's either Ernest or Tarrant. They almost talk about how unified other sort of Asian nations are. There's almost this kind of it's so connected to this sense of loss, I guess. It's like it's almost some kind, even though it's obviously these are kind of anti-minority actors, they still have this kind of form of respect for for nations like China and India. So I think it's really it's something to continue to explore, particularly because, as Munira kind of pointed out, on the face of it, it's quite puzzling when we sort of traditionally think of these ideologies as being very Western, but the structures being, and some of the conspiracy theories being emulated even in content, in an East Asian or Southeast Asian context. So that would be my 2 cents to add. It is interesting to see that present in the manifestos.
Yes, definitely. Well, I am afraid that's all the time that we have for today. I wish that we could continue on this discussion because there's so much to unravel here. So I would just like to thank all of the audience members for joining us today and participating in the Q&A. And yeah, thanks again. And I really hope that you do join the other panels as part of the GNET conference. So thank you very much. And I'd like to thank all of the presenters for their very insightful presentations.